Marvel. Awakening Words, Follow the Law, and Defeat Thanos. Chapter 41. On April 15, Los Angeles, Star Watch was launched. For nearly half a year, Xingyao Group and Xingyao Smartphone Branch have been continuously researching new products. Follow the path taken by the fruit company in the previous life and carry out meticulously. Well, after all, the other party is fruitful. Copying a successful homework will definitely get a good result. At least, copy and copy, you can copy $1 trillion company. Make money. Don't be ashamed. Therefore, Xingyao Watch is the latest product of Xingyao Company, and the target is the fruit watch of the previous life. It can be used with Xingyao's smartphone. It can be positioned, and the health level can be measured. Except for a little expensive, everything else is fine. To be honest, such a conference is not the launch of an important product of Xingyao Company. Therefore, generally by the department manager to attend on it. However, today's press conference scene was extraordinarily noisy, and the number of reporters was extraordinary. Because the conference will be hosted by Lin Duncan. And Lin Duncan, who has been the hottest figure in the past 6 months. At a young age, he has a net worth of nearly 100 billion and is sought after by all media. Especially today's headlines of Shining Star Group, a large number of newspapers and reporters settled in. It can be said to be quite popular and influential. Therefore, even if it is not for interviews, in order to give Lin Duncan a face, major newspapers have sent representatives. Now Lin, sitting backstage getting ready. Before, seeing Pepper and Tony looking at his invitation, they both came to the press conference. Make him very satisfied. Now what about his relationship with Tony? Tony also consciously made friends with him, and Lin also consciously made friends with Tony. Definitely, Lin felt that one of the important reasons why Tony was friendly with him was that Pepper looked at him a bit like he was looking at a scumbag. Therefore, the identity of the rival has disappeared. The relationship will naturally be fine. After all, he had invested in Xingyao before, and the profits he earned back had multiplied dozens of times. This news even made reporters tout him as a investing genius. Well, he is still very satisfied with this report. It is said that he directly invited the beautiful reporter who reported the report back to his Stark villa. Tisk tisk. Therefore, the attitude towards Lin is quite friendly. In addition, the two have similar hobbies in beauty, so they can still talk and have a good relationship. As long as it doesn't involve his lifeline, you can have a good chat. Simply put, the current state is, who friends dog friends. Well, Pepper thinks so. Both of them are geniuses, but the hobbies of these two. Why? As time passed slowly, the press conference officially started soon. I saw that Lin walked up to the front desk, held the microphone, and said aloud. Welcome gentlemen and ladies to the press conference of our Shining Star Company. Today, the theme of the conference is our latest high-tech watch, Xingyao Watch. The watch can be connected with our Xingyao Company's smartphone, and support some simple operations, such as reading information and so on. And our watch, this time has a major innovation. Not only can we monitor the wearer's fitness level, but more importantly, on this watch, we use the most advanced positioning technology in the world. As long as you wear a watch, you can locate it at any time no matter where you go. If you encounter danger, you can roar to rescue in time. Even if you are in a coma, when the Xingyao watch automatically detects that your health is not good, it will automatically call the police and roar will call an ambulance. If the situation is extremely dangerous, our group's Blackstone Security Company can dispatch manpower to rescue at any time. Do your best to keep the wearer safe. Well, it is like this, that is, after dispatching the security company, the cost is definitely not low. After all, Blackstone Security now has a small reputation in the entire United States security market. The role of the Punisher Frank is beyond doubt. Subsequently, Lin began to explain other functions of the watch, and as time passed, the conference was soon completed successfully. Those reporters are very quiet now. After all, in front of all reporters, the deterrent power of Xingyao Group's headlines is unquestionable. A reporter asked Lin questions that should not have been asked before. Afterwards, this person was directly banned by the entire industry. Tisk tisk. Now, I don't know where to hang out. Therefore, All the reporters are quite obedient, they are all good children. As the press conference officially concluded, Lynn Duncan saw where Tony and Pepper were. Just walk over there slowly. Tony Stark is communicating with Pepper. Sudden. Seeing Lynn approaching, he immediately patted Pepper as a reminder. Then, facing Lynn, he waved his hand in a gesture of greeting roar, and said jokingly, "Look, here comes the Oni-san who invited us." Lynn's face froze slightly when he heard Tony's name roar, and then the corners of his mouth twitched slightly. He also stepped forward and said jokingly, "Definitely, model stamp collectors like you are welcome. Good guy. A Oni-san, a model stamp collector. Really hammered, this is the evidence of the two friends." Pepper thought helplessly. Immediately, with a straight face, he said to Lynn, "Mr. Lynn, why did you invite us to attend?" "Well, it's called Roar, quite polite. After all, Lynn is now a minority shareholder in Stark Industries. Yes, Lynn also tried to buy some stocks to prepare for the later big things." Hearing what Pepper said, Lynn smiled softly. "This time, I invite you to come here too. This time, I invite you to come here to give you a gift." Saying that, Lynn waved slightly to Secretary Oni-san next to him, and said with a smile, "Catherine, please bring the present I prepared." Well, this Catherine is the fierce beauty Oni-san Catherine who dared to ask questions at the press conference before. Now, changing careers as Lynn's business secretary. Well, after Lynn's teaching ability is pretty good. Afterwards, Catherine handed the two gift boxes prepared in her hand to Lynn. Lynn then smiled at Tony and Pepper with the gift box. "This is the Star Watch from the press conference just now. This is the latest batch of products. I'm going to send some out in advance, so that some company directors can experience it and see if they can find some bugs. These two are for you. If you find some of these problems, please reply, and our R&D department will make further revisions." With that said, Lynn handed the two gift boxes to Tony and Pepper, and said with a smile, "By the way, because the company's market value has exceeded 100 billion, I have a banquet today that I would like to invite Tony to attend. It is a return visit to the banquet you invited me to attend." Saying that, Lynn blinked at Tony, as if to imply something. Seeing this, Tony said solemnly to Pepper, "My good friend Lynn invited me to his banquet, I'm bound to do it. Pepper, you go back first. I'm flying back to New York tomorrow." Saying that, without waiting for Pepper to respond, he pulled Lynn away. Let Pepper sigh deeply. Sure enough, it's not a family, don't enter a door, Hupung go friends, hammer it again. Well, this banquet is purely an excuse, mainly to give away the Star Watch. The reason why Tony is willing to participate is purely for friendship, to celebrate the market value of his good friend Lynn's company exceeded 100 million. Nothing to do with some of the female friends at the banquet. This is the testimony of their friendship. Ha ha. Lynn's villa at night. At the moment, the villa was very noisy, and a large number of beautiful Oni-san went back and forth at the banquet, toasting each other. At the same time, they kept walking around Tony and Lynn. And Tony at the moment, the mood is also very comfortable. Sure enough, this banquet came right. Lynn's aesthetic is not inferior to his. Tisk tisk. Although he likes models, Oni-san does not reject it either. Definitely, the Oni-san model is naturally the best. Ha ha ha. Afterwards, while drinking with Oni-san next to each other, play a small game to add to the fun. On the one hand, he starts to brag about his genius, enjoying the admiring glance of Oni-san next to him. Well, this time at Lynn's banquet, let's not speak ill of him. After playing for a while, I only saw Lynn took a glass of wine, broke away from a large number of beautiful Oni-san, and walked towards him. Seeing this, Tony also picked up his glass and walked towards Lynn. The two of them touched the wine glasses and made a crisp sound, and then both of them sighed. Finally, look at each other and smile. Then, Tony asked with a little curiosity in his tone. What's wrong? Lynn, what's the matter with me this time? Tony is not stupid. Lynn invited him to the banquet for no reason this time, and at the same time recruited a large number of beautiful women from Roar to serve. There is definitely something in purpose. He listened first, and agreed to the small things. After all, it took a lot of effort to find such a group of beautiful Oni-san. If it's a big deal, please find Pepper first, then his uncle Obadiah. I'm sorry, the friendship between the two of them is not so good. All I could hear was Lin laughing, as if knowing his attitude. Don't worry, Tony, it's just a small thing. We, Shining Star, are ready to further build the reputation of Blackstone Security and increase our market share. Xingyao Watch is one of the links. So, we will give away a batch of watches for free, and would like to invite you, including those executives of your star industries, to use our Xingyao watches. Raise the reputation of our product. It turned out that, Tony Stark made a sudden realization, and said very boldly. Don't worry, the little things will definitely be done properly for you based on the relationship between the two of us. Well, as long as we don't talk about big things, we are good friends. After all, there are very few people who are as talented as him and have the same hobbies. Seeing this, Lin touched the glass again in satisfaction, doing it first as a tribute. The same goes for Tony Stark. Then, Lin said with a smile. Okay, sorry, Tony, don't forget, you've also brought our watch recently, and you should help us promote it. Tonight, you will definitely have a good time. It's easy to talk. I'll bring your watch tomorrow. To be honest, your watch is okay to me. Afterwards, Lin chatted briefly and then parted. After all, learn first. The next day, early in the morning, Lin's villa. Looking at the figure of Tony leaving with the Starlight watch just now, Lin's mouth twitched slightly. His first plan was basically successful. Next, wait for Tony Stark's trip to Afghanistan, and wait for Pepper's help. At that time, the curtain of Marvel officially opened. He will also get the opportunity to upgrade the system. The Third Order eloquence has already allowed others to have extraordinary abilities, so what is the scene of the Fourth Order utterance? Still, just in case, Lin said softly. I think, before being hijacked, Tony would have been wearing a star watch for some time to come. A faint smile appeared on Lin's face as his wealth depleted 500,000. On May 9, 2008, Shining Star Group, Chairman's office. Lin looked at the newspaper in her hand with a faint smile on her face. I saw a huge headline above the newspaper. Shock. Tony Stark's Afghanistan tour hijacked, whereabouts unknown. Sitting quietly in the office chair, waiting for the phone to ring. After a while, the phone rang. Lin looked at the name. Model stamp collector's secretary. Right, immediately, pick up the phone. Immediately afterwards, I heard an urgent, panicked voice from the other end of the phone. Lin, it's okay, something happened to Tony. Then, without waiting for Lin to comfort him, he said immediately. I remember you and Tony talked about a cooperation before. Your company's Star Watch can accurately locate Tony's position, and at the same time send Blackstone Security Company to rescue. Is that true? It seemed that Pepper was really panicking, and Lin immediately comforted in a deep voice. Yes, I also received news here. Pepper, don't worry, I have arranged for someone to locate Tony's location, and I will also leave to go to Afghanistan with the people from Blackstone Security. Don't worry, we'll do our best to find Tony's trail. Hearing Lin's calm tone, Pebble also began to calm down slowly, but there was still a hint of worry in his tone. Okay, then trouble you. Tony is very lucky, and I am very fortunate to have a friend like you. Please let me know immediately if you receive any news. Also, all the information on my side will be synchronized to your Blackstone security personnel immediately. When you get to Afghanistan, someone will communicate with you. After a few brief chats, Pepper hung up the phone and resumed his busy search for Tony Stark's trail. When Lin saw this, a smile formed on the corner of his mouth, and his eyes looked in the direction of Afghanistan. It was like seeing Tony Stark being threatened at the moment. The next day at noon, Afghanistan, the U.S. military base. Frank, how's it going? Did you locate Tony? Lin stretched out her hand to try to block the hot sun, looking out at the yellow desert in the distance. He asked Frank next to him. Frank also glanced at Rhodes, who was standing next to him, and saw Rhodes shaking his head slightly. So he said in a low voice. Boss, according to the information from M.I. Jun and our Blackstone Security, Mr. Tony's location has not been located yet. We found the final location of the Xingyao watch before, but we didn't find any fragments of the watch. I'm afraid that our Xingyao watch has been damaged, and we can only send people to narrow down the scope to search for traces step by step. Or, wait until Mr. Tony takes the initiative to repair the watch before we can get his location. We are now concerned that Mr. Tony is now incapable of action, or the watch has been destroyed by the robbers. Lin frowned slightly when he heard what Frank said, but not too worried. At this stage, Tony is the destiny child of the entire Marvel universe, only constantly encountering danger, but not really dying. Now I hope Tony himself is in better condition, the Star watches on him. With his ability, it can definitely be repaired, and when the time comes, the approximate location will be obtained. Start the rescue plan. Well, at least until Tony completes Iron Man's transformation, otherwise, it's a waste of time. Afterwards, I instructed Frank and the people of Blackstone Security to search further. At this moment, Tony, in ragged clothes and a face full of embarrassment, looked miserable compared to Tony in a suit who was originally bright and bright. Currently, he is talking to the leader of the robbery, Obadiah Stan, and Dr. Ethan is translating next to him. Mr. Robber, if you want me to make missiles, you need a lot of materials. As he spoke, he nodded for Dr. Ethan to translate. After the translation was completed, he took a piece of white paper covered with himself and handed it to the robber closest to him. During the transmission, his eyes were fixed on the hand of a robber next to Obadiah Stan. The robber had in his hand Star Watch. Immediately afterwards, he asked Obadiah, Mr. Robber, accurate time is needed to make missiles. I hope you can give me my watch so that I can align the time, otherwise some problems may occur. After speaking, he asked Dr. Ethan to translate. At the same time, he reached out to the watch that the robber was wearing. After listening to Dr. Ethan's translation, Obadiah exchanged a few words with the subordinates next to him. Then, Tony saw that the subordinate looked at the watch he was wearing, and called out to others a few times. After a while, a robber came over with an alarm clock. Reached out to Tony Stark. Tony reluctantly took it, thinking to himself, it appears that Plan A has failed. Just look at Plan B. At this moment, Tony Stark cursed inwardly. Especially seeing all the robbers leaving. Even whispered cursing. When Dr. Ethan heard it, he shook his head helplessly. Then, whispered to Tony. Mr. Stark, don't scold. If the other party finds out, they will beat us again, or even torture us. What should we do now? Hearing what Dr. Ethan said next to him, Tony also waved his hand helplessly. Said in a dejected tone. My friend Lin gave me a watch with a GPS on it. I looked at it, restarted it, and it will probably be available. When the location is received, someone will definitely come to the rescue. Then, the tone became more and more low. Unfortunately, the other party did not return the watch to me. But then, the tone began to rise, as if speaking with confidence. Don't worry, Ethan, I still have a plan B, and I will definitely take you out of the siege. When the time comes, I'll invite you to my party. As he spoke, he took a pen and paper and started writing and drawing in the corner of the aisle without looking back. As if making a plan. Seeing this, Ethan shook his head slightly, as if a little desperate, but still walked over to Tony and started to help. 7 days later, Afghanistan, U.S. military base. Holding a glass of ice water, Lin asked helplessly to the future war machine Rhodes. Rod, how many places have we searched now? Haven't we found any trace of Tony yet? After listening to Lin's question, Rhodes replied with a hint of despair in his tone. Mr. Lin, we have sent people to search for hundreds of miles around, but we haven't found any trace of Tony. It's been more than a week now, and there is no news of the robbers at all. Do you think? Speaking of which, Rhodes was desperate and dejected. Leaving aside that Tony is his best friend, it's just that Tony was kidnapped under his watch. Later, he will definitely be held accountable. At that time, losing the position will be considered light. Even. Rhodes shivered slightly, as if thinking of a very bad picture. Immediately afterwards, Lin was comforted. Don't worry, Tony will be fine this time. Besides, no news is the best news, maybe the kidnappers are still asking Tony to make weapons for them. Hearing Lin's comfort, Rhodes relaxed a little, but there was still no obvious improvement. Then, pull out the map, make a phone call, and ask someone to find it according to the range he has drawn on the map. At this moment, Lin thought helplessly. Afghanistan is so hot. When will Tony make the iron armor? Let him see it, Iron Man's first armor. At this moment, Tony looked at the large number of devices placed on the ground in front of him. A smile appeared on his face. The steel armor he conceived has been successful. Now, it's time to assemble. But, Tony looked at the surveillance cameras around him, his eyes darkened, and looked at Dr. Ethan next to him, as if to imply something. Subsequently, the two began to assemble the armor in front of the cover and recorded it into the control system. Then, the trajectory of fate began to turn, and Obadiah, the leader of the robbery, found something wrong through the monitor. Immediately send his men to investigate first. After a while, there was a fierce beating sound at the door, and there were many words outside coercing Ethan to open the door. And when they were impatient and ready to force the door, boom! A violent explosion accompanied by flames killed the robbers instantly, leaving only a pile of charred corpses. It was the improvised bomb that Tony and the others had originally set up. Dr. Eason glanced at it and quickly entered the control system in his hand. Seeing that it would take some time to successfully enter, Tony next to him was asking how long it would take, and Dr. Eason's eyes flashed with determination. Speaking to Tony, his tone was full of relief. I'll buy you some time. Then, without waiting for Tony to say anything, he strode outside, picked up the gun left by the robber, and started shooting without looking back. Tony saw this, his eyes flashed with strong guilt, and everything Ethan had communicated with him before. Then eagerly looked at the computer next to him, at the progress bar inside. Time passed little by little, and soon, the system entry was completed. Wearing steel armor, Tony walked outside, turned on the flamethrower, and killed the robbers who came. I saw one robber after another, shooting, but it had no effect on Tony. On the contrary, the hot flames passed through their bodies, causing them to howl in pain in an instant, and soon faced death. After walking a distance and killing many robbers, Tony finally saw Ethan's body, badly injured and covered in blood. With intense sadness and guilt on his face, he stepped forward and tried to comfort Ethan and take him away. But Ethan looked dead, and instead consoled Tony a few words. Say the words Tony Stark can't forget. Don't disappoint my expectations. Then, Dr. Ethan closed his eyes and died. Tony saw this, sadness and guilt flashed across his face, and a look of determination appeared on his face. So far, Iron Man is officially born. The world of Marvel has officially opened. Then, Tony looked around and saw that the robber who had stolen his watch was lying on the ground, wailing in pain. With a ruthless look in his eyes, he strode forward and smashed his head with an iron fist. Then, cut his arm and hold the watch in his arms. Finally, looking at the entrance of the hole, rushed out. Then, not long after, only a rumbling sound was heard. A white line flashed across the sky. At this moment, Lynn began to feel a little tangled in her heart. It's been almost a week since I came to Afghanistan, why haven't I found any trace of Tony? Won't. Lynn shook his head slightly, it shouldn't be, after all, he is the protagonist, with a lot of luck on his body, and it's not time yet. Immediately, he began to think about his own business. In other words, he leaked Hydra Baron Strucker's information to S.H.I.E.L.D. before. On the one hand, in revenge for the Hydra attack. On the other hand, it is also to find something to do for S.H.I.E.L.D., so that he doesn't always go around Xingyao Company. But, according to the monitoring of the artificial intelligence Vera, it was found that S.H.I.E.L.D. did indeed act, but Hydra Straker Blue Jew seemed to have transferred most of the important assets in advance, and basically did not catch too many people. None of the key figures. It seems. Snake S.H.I.E.L.D. Bureau, Real Hammer. At present, it is unrealistic to rely on S.H.I.E.L.D. to combat HYDRA's power. So, Lynn decided to put a load on Hydra. Then, Lynn began to think, how to keep Hydra busy. It didn't take long. Frank trotted over suddenly, patted Lynn, and said in a joyful tone. Boss, found Tony's position. Hey, it seems that Iron Man should be officially born. Immediately, he stood up and said with the same joyful tone. Come on, Frank, let me see with you, how is Tony doing now? Immediately, as if thinking of something, said again. By the way, don't forget, give Pepper a call and tell them that we at BlackRock Security have found Tony's location. Well, this is a great opportunity to promote Blackstone Security, not to be missed. The tycoon was kidnapped, and Blackstone Security successfully rescued the tycoon. This topic can be discussed. Let the people from Totiao arrange it today. Tisk tisk. Then, he followed Frank to board the plane, followed the positioning, and flew to a direction to the west. Above the vast desert, I saw a looming figure. When he got closer, he saw that he was holding a watch in his hand and kept walking towards the east. It didn't take long for a plane to land not far away, and the figure saw the direction where the plane stopped and ran towards the plane like crazy. At this moment, Lin just got off the plane, and during the flight just now, she saw a figure. Well, with far superior eyesight, Lin can be sure that it's definitely Tony Stark. Tisk tisk. Seeing his ragged appearance, Lin's mouth twitched slightly. After getting off the plane, he immediately ran in his direction. Well, I just wanted to witness the profound friendship between the two, and definitely didn't want to see Tony in a mess. After running for a while, the two saw each other's figure. Tony Stark, seeing a figure running towards him, immediately quickened his pace. As the distance got closer, I suddenly saw the clear face of the other party. Immediately shouted in surprise. Oni-san control. How is it you? Lin's face darkened when he heard Tony's words. Good guy, I'm here to save you this time, don't give Roar any respect. Immediately, he said sarcastically. It's not that Pepper asked us at Blackstone Security to rescue you, a model stamp collector. Why, isn't there a model in there for you to collect stamps? Hearing Lin's sarcastic tone, Tony smiled awkwardly. Well, I was so surprised just now that I subconsciously called out the title. The other party finally ran to save him in person, which really shouldn't be called Roar. This favor, he must get it. Immediately, as if nothing was heard, he stepped forward and gave Lin a hug. Thank you Lin, thank you guys at BlackRock Security, let's go back to New York now. I'm a little homesick. Lin had a look of disgust at Tony's ragged and dirty look, but he also opened his arms and hugged him lightly. Well, it's purely a favor and friendship from Iron Man. The two hugged and then separated, and Lin walked towards the plane with Tony and Frank behind him. After walking into the plane, the accompanying doctor immediately performed some physical examinations on Tony. After finding that there was no major problem, he took him to the bathroom next to the plane, washed briefly, and changed into new clothes. When everything was over, he looked at Tony who was clean and haggard. Lin nodded in satisfaction. Then, with a hamburger in hand and a Coke in hand, he walked up to Tony and handed it to him. Well, I heard that Tony likes to eat hamburgers. Vera's investigation shows that this is true. Watching Tony Stark say thank you and start eating. Lin spoke casually beside him, his tone seemed to have a strange inducement. Tony, don't you think it's a little weird this time? Your itinerary, your company and Mi Jun are very confidential. And this time the robbers, according to our investigation, seem to have known all your itineraries in advance and arranged them in advance. I told you. Tony, I told you, I was attacked once before. Having said this, Lin's tone paused. Seeing this, Tony lifted his head, stopped swallowing, and looked at Lin, as if telling him to continue. Seeing this, Lin flashed an imperceptible smile in her eyes, and continued to speak slowly. I have investigated and there are professional spies in our company, not commercial spies, but agents similar to those. I found that their goal should be to kill me, and then directly acquire our Shining Star company, in order to obtain a confidential technology of the company. So, this time you have a problem, it's hard to guarantee that it's not another action by the other party. They, perhaps, are interested in your Stark Industries, or have colluded with someone in your company. I suggest you to check it out. At the same time, like me, you can train your own security forces to protect yourself. Hearing this, Tony was stunned for a moment, lowered his head and started eating the hamburger in his hand again, but the speed slowed down a bit, as if thinking about something. When Lin saw this, a smile formed on the corner of his mouth. Well, let Tony infiltrate here first, and then let today's headlines under the group promote it. It is best to pull out a large number of rich people who are prepared for danger in times of peace, and capitalists work together. On his side, from time to time, he leaks some right and wrong information. Lin couldn't believe it, there was no pressure on HYDRA's side. Worst of all, you can also solicit more business for your own Blackstone Security company. To increase some wealth value, it is also considered to increase the strength. Well, no matter what, Hydra's black pot must be settled. He developed today's headlines and controlled the power of public opinion, not just to deal with such problems. Hydra attacked himself. Even if Shield won't let you pay, he must make you pay. Vengeance will come. Lin is here. The next day, Los Angeles, the chairman's office of Shining Star Group. Lin was reclining on the boss chair, watching the screen broadcast on the computer. A smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. It is reported. Tony Stark will promise to officially close the military industry sector. This move will definitely have a serious adverse impact on Stark Industry stock price. Well, Tony's classic scene, Lin witnessed it in person. Even, in relation to the reports, Lin has a conscious indulgence. The goal is to. Lin whispered into the computer. Vera, guide the negative reports of Stark Industries on the side, but don't show any traces. At the same time, continue to buy shares of Stark Industries at a low price. Well, for Stark Industries stock, or equity. Then, pick up the phone and see. Model stamp collectors, click once, wait to be answered, when the call is connected. Hey, Tony, how's it going on your side? I see a lot of negative reports on your Stark Industries, and the stock price has gone down a lot. Would you like me to arrange today's headlines to suppress you a little? Just rely on our friendship to minimize your losses. Well, the instructions to Vera just now were all illusions and hallucinations. Hearing this, I heard Tony's tone of voice was rather strange, a little sarcastic. Really? How do I feel like someone in the stock market is buying up a lot of our Stark Industries stock? So, why don't you do me a favor? Tell the other party that the stock is transferred to me, and I will buy it at 30% higher than the market price. When Lin heard this, his tone stagnates slightly, and he said with a ha-ha. This is not the unanimous agreement of our group's investment department. There are geniuses like you. Stark Industries definitely has huge potential. So, before Lin could finish speaking, Tony continued. It's all right, needless to say, I owe you a big favor if you go to Afghanistan to save me yourself. It's just that at the shareholders meeting in a few days, the representatives of your company will come over to fully support all my decisions. This, no problem, I will give you an order. I will arrange it for you, and I will definitely be on your side. Just based on our friendship and the equity we hold, others have absolutely nothing to say. At this moment, Lin's tone sounded as if she had patted her chest and made a promise. In the end, the two briefly chatted for a few words, and then hung up the phone. After the call ended, a faint smile appeared on Lin's face. This call was made intentionally by him. When he made an acquisition through Vera before, he found out that the same party was acquiring the shares of Stark Industries, and checked the traces. Well, Tony's villa, it seems that JARVIS is starting to work. Since Lin can find the traces of Tony's acquisition, Tony can naturally find the traces of Lin's acquisition. This call is actually to inform Tony Stark that it can not only affect the friendship, but also start the subsequent cooperation. Otherwise, no matter who it is, knowing that there is a force behind it is secretly buying its own stock, it will definitely not look good. But, most importantly now, how Hydra Baron Strucker pays. Vengeance must be repaid, this is his creed. Thinking of this, Lin set her sights on an app on her phone. Headlines today. 3 days later, the office of the chairman of Shining Star Group. Headlines today. Lin sat in the boss chair and nodded with satisfaction, watching the large number of reports pushed to him by Vera in front of him. Shock. Lin Duncan, chairman of Shining Star Group, has another truth about the previous vehicle explosion. Shocking. The underworld forces are the merger and acquisition company, and they directly send their subordinates to kill the rich. The United States top capitalists are in danger, and the evil forces are quietly coming to the door. Shock. Tony himself said that the robbery incident has another shady story. Well, about Tony's report, I called Tony ahead of time and talked about it. Although Tony felt slightly uncomfortable, he readily agreed because of his previous favors. Therefore, Lin kept reading a lot of reports pushed by Vera, and the more she read, the more happy she became. He couldn't believe it. This time, Hydra didn't pay a price. As long as a few top capitalists put pressure on it, Whether it's the CIA, the FBI, or the SHIELD, it has to be forced into action. There is absolutely no way to stop without an explanation. Thinking of this, Lin ordered Vera. Vera, control the push logic of today's headlines, and regularly push similar news to major company bosses and capitalists. Okay, sir, it's being revised, the revision is complete, and it's being pushed. As the soft voice for Vera sounded, Lin squinted and smiled, as if enjoying something. Right at the moment, there was a sudden noise outside the office, and Lin frowned slightly. Then, not long after, a voice was vaguely heard. Sir, please stop your actions, our chairman is really no longer in the office, you need to make an appointment in advance. Sorry, I'm the FBI. I need to contact Lin, chairman of Shining Star Group, for something. It didn't take long for the sound to stop, and suddenly, Lin's office door was pushed open. What? Lin snorted, and it turned out to be Phil Coulson, the mayor of the legendary Novice Village in the Marvel world. Didn't I say FBI just now? Tisk tisk tisk, it seems that the name of SHIELD is really not deterrent. That's right, the name of the elder, whoever listens to it, feels like a place for old age. Seeing the slightly bald head in front of him, a slightly fat white man in a black suit. Lin waved to the security guard behind him, signaling to step back. Then stared at Phil Coulson in front of him. Phil Coulson saw this with a friendly smile on his face, picked up the document in his hand, and said gently. Hello, Mr. Lin, I'm an FBI agent and would like to hear some details about your previous attack. Are you free now? Lin glanced at Phil Coulson's FBI credentials, and replied with a hint of surprise on his face. Definitely, Mr. FBI, I am very willing to share with you the bad behavior of those evil forces in the past. At the same time, I will also applaud your heroic actions to your chief. I rarely see an agent like you who dares to break into my office. Speaking of which, there was a bit of a smile on his face. It's similar to a black chief I met before. Phil Coulson heard this, and his heart froze slightly, but there was no change on his face, with a friendly smile on his face, as if he hadn't heard the last sentence, he said. Thank you for the compliment, can we start now? Excuse me, do you know anything about the forces that attacked you before? Hearing this, Lin looked at Phil Coulson with a smile in his eyes, and said calmly. As for the forces that attacked me, after investigation, they were agents of my company in advance, and they were still my female secretary. This point, I believe you should be very clear. After all, are they all peers? Isn't it, my FBI agent? As for Lin's words, he continued as if he didn't hear the hint. Yes, according to our investigation, it is found that your female secretary, Miss Emily, has a strange whereabouts. It is very likely that she was the agent sent by the Strength to attack you. So, I would like to ask you to provide some information so that we can further arrest the forces that attacked you. Also, I hope you will pay more attention to safety recently. The reports on your group's headlines today are likely to cause frantic revenge from hostile forces. So, do you need us to send an agent to protect your safety? What? Let the Snake Shield Bureau protect it, it is better not to protect it. Lin twitched the corners of her mouth slightly and said with a slight disdain in her tone. Rest assured, I have been alert to the previous attack. The Blackstone Security Company under our command has made a big statement throughout Migo, and it can definitely protect myself and the safety of our group. We absolutely believe we have the ability to prevent some villain from snooping. Having said that, Lin glanced sharply around Phil Coulson. Phil Coulson didn't seem to see the sharp eyes, and continued to open his mouth and slap a few words. When Lin saw this, he opened his mouth to reconcile, and started chasing people. Although Phil Coulson was a little helpless about this, he looked at the several Blackstone security staff behind him and walked behind him very obediently. Lin watched Phil Coulson leave, the corners of her mouth twitching slightly. His purpose, or a Nick Fury's meaning, was clear. That is to say, Hydra is very likely to attack Lin further, and SHIELD will take this action. In other words, it means SHIELD wants to use Lin as bait. Hope Lin will cooperate. Lin felt disdain for this, but she was also slightly vigilant in her heart. Night, New York, Hydra's secret base. At this moment, Emily, who was wearing a black battle suit, said to Carl, the director of operations in front of her. Director, what should we do about Lin's public opinion guiding behavior? Opposite, the director of operations in a blue suit said slowly. No rush, we can relax a little bit about Lin. Immediately afterwards, he set his eyes in the direction of Stark Industries and muttered to himself. The most important thing now is New York, Hydra's secret base. Operations Director Carl is making a phone call in a secret room at the moment. After a while, the call was successfully connected. I saw Carl said in a very respectful tone. My lord, I have something to report. Carl, you said. A thick voice came. Immediately afterwards, Carl slightly increased the speed of his speech, and his tone remained respectful. Lord Baron, I have investigated a secret that I believe will be of great help to our great cause of restoring order. What's the matter? Lord Baron, before, I saw Lin Duncan constantly smearing us, and Tony Stark was talking affirmatively next to us. So, I wonder if someone else at Hydra did this robbery. After my investigation, I found out that the mastermind this time turned out to be Tony's uncle, Obadiah. Speaking of this, Carl's tone was obviously smiling. Having this in hand, we can absolutely control Obadiah, and in turn, Stark Industries, and help us restore order. More importantly, my lord, you don't know what I found. Speaking of which, his tone clearly revealed surprise. Tony Stark actually invented the steel armor and killed hundreds of robbers just by hand hammering the weapon himself. And if you use professional technology to make corrections, it will definitely strengthen the power. At that time, our great cause of rebuilding order will take an important step, and other Hydras will completely surrender to your feet. Speaking of this, Carl's tone revealed a lot of excitement, as if seeing everyone kneeling at his feet. Only. When the Baron heard what Carl said, he seemed to have a little interest, but it was not very strong, and I saw him say it lightly. Okay, Carl, you're in charge of this first, and as for Lin, after we take control of Stark Industries, teach him a deep lesson. Also, don't forget about Inhumans and report the latest progress in a timely manner. Okay, my lord, I have arranged for a special department to keep an eye on all the information. Once there is news, I will immediately go out and arrest them. Okay. Later, the Baron asked Carl about the Inhumans, and the two ended their conversation with Hydra Hail and hung up the phone. Operations Director Carl received permission from Baron Strucker. Immediately, start calling the agents under your hand and start ordering tasks. Following the orders one after another, more than 10 figures left the Hydra secret base. The next day, New York, Stark Industries, penthouse office. Obadiah was sitting in front of the desk, staring at the computer in front of him, frowning tightly. The so-called Afghan terrorists I contacted before have no effect at all. It even allowed Tony to escape from the heavy siege. What's more troublesome is that there is no news from the previous contact information. As if it disappeared out of thin air, or die. Thinking of this, Obadiah couldn't help rubbing his temples, as if he wanted to release some kind of pressure. Those terrorists hold the secret of the connection between the two. It would be nice if they disappeared or destroyed together. If someone got it, or Tony knew about it, it would be troublesome. At this moment, Obadiah's eyes flashed fiercely, as if he was about to make an important decision. In order to prevent Tony from knowing, even if there was only a slight chance. My nephew, don't blame me for being ruthless. After all, if I hadn't been running Stark Industries all these years, you would have collapsed. Even if you are a chicken that lays golden eggs, as long as you want to peck me, don't blame me for being ruthless. At the moment, an email suddenly came from the computer. There seems to be a video in the email. Most importantly, the name of the email made Obadiah's pupils shrink. Mr. Obadiah, we have mastered the matter you entrusted to Afghanistan. I believe that you will be very interested in the video in the email. When I saw this email, I suddenly turned my head and looked around, as if to see if anyone else passed by. As if touching a poisonous snake, I carefully controlled the mouse and clicked on this email. After reading the text in the email, click on the video in the email. Obadiah, who had an extremely ugly face at first, began to look a little excited, and even a trace of fanaticism appeared in his eyes. I saw that the video in the email mainly introduced the process of Tony using the steel armor to kill the robbers and escape. And more importantly, an address was attached to the email, and the remains of the steel armor remained. Obadiah is confident that with the technology of Stark Industries, it is absolutely possible to reverse all the casting process of steel armor. After all, Tony Stark can make it by hand with a hammer. It makes no sense. With the advanced Stark industrial technology, it can't be pushed backwards. As long as he can obtain the technology of steel armor, even if he kills Tony, he is confident that he will get the support of the military and completely control the tank industry. However, what puzzled Obadiah was who sent him this email. What is the purpose of this email? However, after thinking for a while without an answer, I stopped thinking about it. After all, with Stark Industries in charge, he can fix everything. At that time, no matter which force it is, they must know the fate of scheming with the Tiger. The next morning, New York, outside the Stark building. Obadiah just got off the car and is preparing to go to his office to handle company affairs. Just got out of the car, followed by the next woman in a business secretary outfit. In this regard, Obadiah did not have any attitude, and walked directly into the main entrance of Stark building. When the security personnel in front saw the company's big boss coming, they opened the door one after another, and said hello very flatteringly. But the security guard looked at the woman in the business secretary suit behind Obadiah with puzzled eyes. As if noticing the suspicious eyes of the security guards, Obadiah said lightly with a blank face. "This is Miss Jill, and she will be my life secretary in the future." Then, as if to say something meaningful, "Remember this face, and don't forget to let it go in the future." The security guards nodded and bowed, as if putting this order in the deepest part of their hearts. Miss Jill behind her, as if she hadn't heard the last word, with a friendly smile floating on her face, greeted Roar and said hello to the security guards. Obadiah snorted and walked straight forward, followed by Jill. Well, yesterday he went to the location in the email and saw that mysterious force. Although he obtained the steel armor, the other party even promised to support him in the military. But the other party sent someone to follow him. Although this person obeyed all his orders, he did his best to even spend a crazy night in the villa last night. Tisk tisk. I have to say, it's good to be young. He was a little older last night, and he couldn't bear it. Still, send someone and follow him. What is this behavior? It is clear that he does not trust him. Obadiah, thinking that he has been in the shopping mall for many years, purely relying on sincerity and integrity. As a result, the other party's behavior broke his heart. However, there is no way. The other party has few people, and the people he sent to follow him yesterday solved it in 3 strokes. I really don't know how 5 people can solve 20 people in just 1 minute. I'll talk to you when I get the hang of Stark Industries. What is integrity? What is sincerity? Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, the Shining Star Group office. Lynn, who was dealing with the company affairs at hand, suddenly heard a soft and serious voice from the computer. Sir, Emily's trace has been captured. May I ask if more resources will be mobilized for in-depth tracking and security personnel will be sent to arrest her? What? Lynn was easy to live, and when she heard what Vera said, she immediately ordered her to open the clues of Hydra agent Emily. Almost instantly, a video popped up in the movie. In this video, Obadiah got out of the car and brought Secretary Gill to meet the security guard. Well, this was specifically ordered by Lynn. Now that he knew that Obadiah was the mastermind behind the robbery of Iron Man, he naturally monitored the order well, and it was best to keep track of him, and finally let Tony owe him a big favor. It is a pity that Obadiah's own security force is not weak, and it also has artificial intelligence for defense. Although it is much weaker than Vera, it will definitely expose traces if it is forcibly monitored. Therefore, Vera is mostly monitored from the side. Result. Tisk tisk, unexpectedly, Hydra really got together with Obadiah. This time, he didn't use his words. It's just to discredit Hydra and put a burden on them, but I didn't expect it to become a reality. Could it be that his speaking skills have been improved with ability? If so, that's the best. What surprised him even more was that Emily's makeup skills were really amazing. Watching the video, you can't see the other party's original appearance at all. Well, although he is still a Oni-san, his appearance is very different. If it weren't for the artificial intelligence Vera, it would monitor her movement traces, skeleton outlines, and so on. Even in person, he might not recognize each other. Anyway, Hydra got together with Obadiah. This means that the Marvel story has begun to have signs of chaos. It seems that he has made an impact in the Marvel world. Hopefully, the trajectory in the future can still be roughly the same, which will also allow him to extract a lot of benefits as much as possible. Familiar future, this weapon. But, as long as he can have an absolute advantage, even if the future is chaotic, it doesn't matter. After all, in any world, the strong have the right to speak, and the weak have no chance to say no. 7 days later, the chairman's office of Shining Star Company. Lin, holding the newspaper in his hand, looked at the prominent headline in the newspaper, and the corner of his mouth twitched slightly. Shock. Unidentified flight object appears over New York City. Seeing the information in the newspaper, Lin gave Vera a light command. Vera, check to see if the military has recently pursued unidentified flight objects, and pay attention to starting from roads. Okay, sir, looking for information. The news was successfully found. About 2 days ago, the military pursued an unknown flight object and encountered a crash. In the end, the pilot was safe and sound. Hearing Vera's reply, Lin An's face rose with a sure-footed look. So, he instructed Vera. Vera, help me make an appointment with Tony Stark. Okay, sir, making an appointment. Successful appointment. Mr. Tony said he will be waiting for you at his villa at 9 a.m. tomorrow. The next day, New York, Stark Villa. Lin just got out of the car and waved at the driver, signaling him to go back early. On the other hand, he looked at the Stark Villa not far ahead. A faint smile floated on his face. This time, I came here purely to see Tony's steel armor. To be honest, Lin wanted to join Tony's party again, but unfortunately, Tony was greatly stimulated by the last robbery incident. He stayed in the villa all day long and couldn't come out. Having received the news before, Lin understood that Tony has been building his own Mark I for 80% of the time. According to Vera's news, Tony's steel armor Mark I has been formed. Then he is welcome. Although he has his own words, he is very happy to collect a steel armor. This is Iron Man's armor, and it's enough to touch Lin's coolness just from there. However, if you want it directly, Tony may give it out of favor, but the relationship between the two is 80% broken. So, it's up to Lin to plan for it. Besides, Hydra and Obadiah were messing around, and if they really did a trick on Tony, it would disrupt Lin's plans. It didn't take long for Lin to reach the gate of the villa. Then, the door opened automatically, and a male voice came from Lin's ear. Welcome to Mr. Lin, Mr. Stark has been waiting for a long time. Hearing this, Lin pouted. Well, it's Jarvis's voice, yes, but Tony is waiting for a while. Tisk tisk. If it was before, I am afraid that the two of them will be waiting together. Immediately, without thinking about it, Lin strode in while looking at the door that kept opening. After entering Tony's villa and going upstairs, he saw Tony modifying the steel armor by himself. Sure enough, he was still busy with his own business. After seeing Tony, Lin made a direct move to roar, and then began to watch the steel armor. Reach out and touch, and listen to the crisp sound of fingers and steel armor. Well, the treasure I dreamed of in my previous life, I have to play with it more this time. Tony saw this scene, looked at Lin helplessly, and continued to modify his Mark I. You know, some time ago, he encountered a small accident when he was flying high in the sky, and he was checking for leaks to see if there were any other problems. After watching for a while, Lin smiled and whispered to Tony. Tony, you just used this mech to save the pilot. How does it feel to fly high? Isn't it cool? Tisk tisk tisk, I have to say that your technique is absolutely amazing. Tony raised his eyebrows when he heard Lin's words. I knew it was okay for you to come. Sure enough, I guessed right, you came for my Mark I. What's the matter? I want one too. Hearing this, Lin said with a haha. Where, just curious. To be honest, this is the first time I've seen something like this. Then, Lin said tentatively. Can I take a test drive? Seriously, I'm a little curious. In response, Tony waved his hands and said jokingly. You know, I'm a person who never drives a car with anyone. Saying that, Tony blinked, as if to imply something. Then, continued to jokingly say. Next time, wait for the opportunity to build a new one just for you. Well, politely declined. Lin is not discouraged, this is within his expectations, and he can plan later. However, when he came to Tony's villa, it was not simply to observe the steel armor. Rather, Lin's face was straight, and he said to Tony with a serious tone. Tony, this time is not for your Mark 1 steel armor. Before Lin could finish, Tony interjected. Oh, what is that? JARVIS noticed that you asked your AI to search for military information about me. Well, it's a real hammer. No wonder Tony let him see the battle armor scene, it seems that he was already prepared. Lin didn't think much, and continued to speak seriously. Tony, leave that out of the way. Remember that I mentioned to you before that a mysterious force attacked me, maybe even the mastermind behind your attack. Really? I always thought you wanted that party to take the blame. Tony Tank continued to chime in with some joking. Tony, don't interrupt, what I'm talking about is serious. Immediately after, Lin looked serious and spoke to Tony in a more serious tone. Didn't our company have a female spy sent by the other party before? It's my secretary. You know what? I found something amazing. I've been searching for traces of them behind the scenes. As a result, I found this secretary spy in your company. It seems that what I said before is completely true. The other party just wants to kidnap you, and then steal his Stark Industries. It's like killing me and stealing the Shining Star Group. Well, there is nothing wrong with logic. Continue to smear. What's more troublesome is that the identity of the object she infiltrated is extremely special. Currently the life secretary of your uncle Obadiah. Having said that, Lin began to order Vera in his mobile phone to transmit data packets to JARVIS. Pull out 2 pictures to prove that the two are exactly the same person. What he didn't notice was a flash of surprise in Tony's eyes. Then go on. I suspect now that she leaked your itinerary information and caused this Afghan robbery. So, I came here specifically to remind you. Well, the main thing is to remind me, I definitely don't want to pull you and Hydra together. Not even suggesting that your uncle is likely to be the real culprit. Hearing Lin's words, Tony's brain began to spin, and he quickly understood what Lin was implying. His face suddenly sank. Lin saw the darkened Tony, the corners of his mouth twitched slightly, knowing that his plan had worked. Really? I heard Tony say. Okay, I see what you mean, thanks for the reminder. Then, Tony spoke very solemnly, as if he had made up his mind. I, Tony Stark, never owe anyone a favor. There was a faint smile on Lin's face. Afterwards, the two had a heated discussion about whether to hold the party tonight and who to invite. But, the arrival of Pepper interrupted the rhythm of the intense exchange between the two. Lin stared at the man behind Pepper with scrutiny. Well, a familiar man. Hello Lin. When Pebble saw the face, he called Roar first. Then he turned his head and said to Tony. Tony, there is a bureau that wants to ask about the robbery incident again. Mr. Tony, do you have time to chat now? After Pepper finished speaking, he gave Phil Coulson an apologetic look, as if he had forgotten their name in the bureau before expressing himself. Phil Coulson was helpless when he saw this behind him. Then he glanced at Lin, then turned to Tony, a little embarrassed. We are the Homeland Strategic Defense Attack and Logistics Support Bureau, I would like to ask. What is the National Territory Strategy? Before Phil Coulson could finish, Tony interjected. My God, the name of your bureau has to be changed, how did you endure such a long name? Lin next to him also nodded in agreement. I once suggested that their director must change his name. But, it seems that they have not taken my advice. Hearing Lin interjecting next to him, Tony was rather curious. Lin, do you know this long game? Lin joked about Tony's question, ignoring Phil Coulson's embarrassed look next to him. Their chief is very distinctive, Tony, I'm sure you'll never forget it after you've seen it. Then he turned to Phil Coulson and said with a half smile. This agent, is your identity confirmed now? Phil Coulson naturally understood the hint in Lin's words, but he didn't seem to hear it, and the friendly smile returned to his face. Mr. Stark, we are also trying to change the name of our bureau. Now, we want to inquire about this robbery incident. This is also to better help you catch the real murderer and find out the truth. So, Mr. Stark, please cooperate with our work. I believe that our Homeland Strategic Defense Attack and Logistics Support Bureau will be able to help you. Tony was very dismissive of what Phil Coulson said, and said in a somewhat cynical tone. You'd better pay attention to the name of your own organization first, it's too long. As for catching the real murderer, I can do it myself. You guys, please give me as much information as possible. That's what helped me the most. Finally, ignoring Phil Coulson's move to continue talking. He waved at Phil Coulson, as if chasing someone. Now, this agent of what bureau, go back. I'm still busy with something. As he spoke, he turned to Phil Coulson, and then followed Lin into another heated discussion, as if he was busy with something very important. Seeing this, Lin directly gave Phil Coulson a good-looking look. No matter how Phil Coulson's expression changed, he continued to discuss with Tony. Well, mainly to see the embarrassed Phil Coulson, and it has nothing to do with the party at night. The next day, in the morning, Stark Villa. At this moment, Lin, who had just left Stark's villa, smacked her lips a little, quite aftertaste. Last night was crazy. In order to pay back his favor, Tony really called all the best resources in New York. Tisk tisk. With his physical fitness, he still felt a little overwhelmed. As for Tony, there was a contemptuous smile on the corner of Lin's mouth. Scum. Immediately, without looking back, he boarded the car and asked the driver in the car to drive to an address. The one who came to New York this time has already completed the first mission. Now, Tony is on his intended path. So, it's time to do the next thing. This time he came to New York, not just for Tony Stark. More importantly, Lin set his eyes on the front of the car, and the direction the car was driving was a well-known location in New York. Hell's Kitchen. New York, Manhattan, Hell's Kitchen. New York has long been known as Roar, which is both heaven and hell. Paradise stems from New York's booming economy. Hell, it refers to its fierce competition and cruelty, among which, Hell's Kitchen is a typical representative. There are a lot of gangs running rampant in it, maybe the words are wrong, and people immediately start shooting with guns. In response, the Hell's Kitchen police precinct did not respond. All residents are familiar with this phenomenon. I travel every day, without a gun in my hand, and walking unsteadily. It's called, the Gotham City of the Marvel Universe. And New York's underground forces have many components. The main members include the Hand, the Russian Mafia, the Mexican criminal group and so on. Regardless of any region, the premise of continued stability is that there must be a ruler. The reason why Hell's Kitchen has been stable so far is that it is closely related to its ruler. And the one who rules Hell's Kitchen is Wilson Fisk. In other words, Kim and Jin Bing and his subordinates completely control the entire underground gray industrial chain in New York, and even radiate the entire United States, with great influence. For Jin Bing, he is the Earth Emperor of Hell's Kitchen. Lin didn't want to deal with such a crouching dragon if it wasn't necessary. After all, as long as he is long enough, he is enough to be above the entire Marvel world. Why bother to provoke strong enemies in the embryonic stage? Although Jin Bing is not strong, if he really wants to send someone to make trouble for the Xingyao group, it is possible for Lin to spend more time and waste a lot of time. But there is a treasure in Hell's Kitchen that attracts Lin's attention very much. For this treasure, it is impossible to fight with the underground forces in New York and even Jin. And the treasure in Hell's Kitchen is Keel. New York is the Keel in Hell's Kitchen. It was a treasure that caught Lin's eyes. Treasures throughout the Marvel Universe are endless. However, in terms of the difficulty of obtaining treasures and their preciousness, the first one is definitely the Keel. Think about it. Treasures like Keel can bring life back to life. The forces to contend for are only the weak supernatural beings like the Hand Heihui and the Defender Alliance. Also add at most one gold union. In contrast, the characters involved in Tesseract, Time Gem, etc. are basically characters who can destroy the world. Tisk tisk. Lin felt that if he didn't take down the Keel, he felt a little sorry for himself to travel to the Marvel world. Not to mention, the Marvel world has only just begun, according to information provided by Vera. The Hand Association has not found any trace of the Keel, but has been looking for it. You say, is Lin worthy of his own hard work day and night if he doesn't get involved? Definitely, the most important thing is one thing. Now that the luck value has reached 25,000, Lin is confident that it will get together as soon as possible from the 100,000 air luck value required by the system to upgrade to level 4. He didn't believe it, killing a Hydra would have no effect. Therefore, the most important problem for him now is the power of the source. Originally even conjectured that the power of the source may be related to infinite gems, but the difficulty of obtaining it is too great at present. The most accessible space gems are all under the strict protection of S.H.I.E.L.D., and Vera has no information at all. So, Lin set her sights on other treasures in the Marvel Universe. And treasures like the keel that can be brought back to life, naturally have to try it out. So, even with a flood of beasts ahead, Lin has to fire a machine gun. Well, kill if you can. If you can't kill, retreat first, and then ask someone to continue to kill. New York, Manhattan, Hell's Kitchen, 35 Morrington Street. Lin sat in the car and looked at the slightly deserted street, especially the graffiti, stains, and gangsters tattooed on the street in 2s and 3s on the shops around the street. I couldn't help smacking my teeth, feeling quite curious. To be honest, since he traveled to the Marvel world, he spent most of his time either at the company, at the hotel, or at various parties. The most difficult environment is Afghanistan, but under the US military base, the living environment is also okay. But it's the first time I've seen something like Hell's Kitchen that makes me feel a little disgusting. No wonder it's called Hell's Kitchen. Most of the output is garbage. Well, there are some good ones too, like the Defenders. This time he has the opportunity to observe and observe. To be honest, he is very curious about Jessica Jones. Tisk tisk, just don't know that she is now controlled by the Purple Man. Thinking of this, Lin commanded Vera. Wyla, search for traces of Jessica Jones, keywords office, women, flight, infinite power. Okay sir, searching for information. Find a target candidate that meets the requirements. The other party is currently in room 702, 7th floor, 115 Morrington Street. Identification information. Name Jessica Jones. What? Lin whimpered lightly. Vera said so. Did Jessica say it was nearby? Mind so. Lin immediately ordered to the driver in front. Tom, let's go to 115 Morrington Street now and park from there. I have something to do. Okay sir, please wait a moment, it's up ahead. After a while, the car stopped. After Lin got out of the car, he waved to the security guards behind and motioned for them to wait downstairs. So I walked upstairs slowly and walked to a room on the left side of the 7th floor. Looking at the 702 written on it and the logo of Jessica's office, Lin's mouth twitched slightly before knocking on the door. Dong dong dong. Not long after, I saw a clear female voice coming from inside the room. Come on, please wait. Then, the door of the house opened slightly. From the gap in the door, Lin Renan could clearly see that there was a young Caucasian Oni-san wearing a white shirt, full of energy and good looks. Tisk tisk, this figure, yes. As soon as his mind turned, he immediately said to Jessica Jones in front of him. Hello, I see the logo on it is Jessica's office. You should be Miss Jessica Jones, right? I have one thing that I would like to entrust to your firm. With that said, Lin opened the door directly, walked into Jessica's room, and looked around. Well, the space of the room is not bad, the cleanliness, alas, can only say that it is okay. Sure enough, single women aren't much better. Jessica looked at the handsome guy in a suit in front of her, and felt a little familiar, but she didn't think much about it. She didn't have time to stop her. She watched him walk into her house and ran back immediately. Quickly pack up the clothes, underwear and the like hanging on the stool. Then he said a little embarrassedly. This gentleman, I don't know how to call him roar. I don't know what we need to do. In this regard, Lin did not have any expression, and said unhurriedly. You can call me Duncan. I need to investigate some information about all the recent high-rise buildings that have been sold or have been sold in the vicinity of Hell's Kitchen. Well, the keel must be buried under the tall building. According to the memory of the previous life, there should be a building that is about to be sold, and the traces are leaked. So, if you follow this clue, you should be able to get valuable clues. Hearing this, Jessica nodded directly. Okay, no problem, we will pack up this information here and give it to you. Excuse me, is there anything else? Hearing this, Lin said calmly. On my side, find another person who claims to be called Zirin. I'm looking for another trail who claims to be the Purple Man. His name is Kilgrave. Someone said that you have some clues and are also looking for it. So, this matter is also entrusted to Jessica's office. Lynn saw that when she heard the word Zirin, her face sank instantly, and her fists were clenched tightly. There is even some tendency to want to attack. However, after hearing what Lynn said later, Jessica didn't make any substantive actions, but asked with some gritted teeth. Mr. Duncan, I don't know what you have to do with this Purple Man. Lynn waved his hand slightly and said with a flat face. This Purple Man has caused serious psychological and even physical damage to an employee of our company, so we need to catch his trace and deal with it. Well, there's nothing wrong with this. He decided to recruit Jessica to his company. Doesn't the logic make sense here? Jessica's inner sense of justice and morality is not as strong as other superheroes. Pretty much in line with Lynn's values. Therefore, it has the value of vigorous cultivation. Definitely, it all starts with arresting Ziren. Jessica is now like a vigilant squirrel. Extremely vigilant and extremely sensitive at heart. These need to be gradually adjusted later. Then, Lynn asked Jessica with a smile. Miss Jessica, do you want to accept our company's commission? Or, another way, do you want to join forces with our company to arrest and even kill the Ziren? Believe that with your own strength, it will be difficult to find Kilgrave in a short period of time. Well, Lynn is a little curious about Kilgrave. Kilgrave can use words to control the actions of others, and Lynn can also use words to influence everything in the world. Although the two are formed in different ways, they may also have certain reference significance. No matter how bad it is, you can still get Jessica's opportunity to join the Shining Star group. Well, a good deal, capitalist Lynn thought. Hearing Lynn's request, Jessica lowered her head in thought, and slowly loosened her clenched fist. Then he reached out and shook it to Lynn. Seeing this scene, Lynn's mouth twitched, reached out and shook it, and said softly. Happy cooperation. If I receive news from Kilgrave, I welcome Miss Jessica. With that said, Lynn took out a smartphone with his company's logo printed on it and a pair of headphones, and said to Jessica. Miss Jessica can use this phone to communicate. At the same time, he blinked at Jessica and said jokingly. And the previous task, don't forget to do it, you can send it through this mobile phone. The deposit of 3,000 yuan has already arrived in your bank card account, and the remaining 7,000 yuan will be transferred to your account immediately after the task is completed, so pay attention to check it. After finishing speaking, Lynn didn't wait for Jessica's request, and walked out of the room and went downstairs. Well, it's definitely not because the room smells of inferior wine, it's just that the foreshadowing has been buried, and you don't need to spend more time waiting for the fruits to be harvested. Jessica kept staring at Lynn's leaving figure, as if thinking about something. Also seems to understand something. He holds the smartphone and earphones Lynn gave him tightly in his hands. When he put his eyes on the logo on the back of the smartphone, he immediately recalled the identity of the man just now. His face changed, it turned out to be the chairman of Shining Star Group. Lynn. Duncan. Lynn walked downstairs and looked at the front door, the driver who had been waiting for a long time. Looking back at the 7th floor of the building behind, as if seeing a figure behind the window, the corners of his mouth twitched slightly. Then, go straight into the car. After entering the car, he directly instructed Vera. Vera, search the whole country for traces of the Purple Man Kilgrave. He usually likes to wear purple suits, and organizes all his actions into reports to me. You can start with the controlled encounters of Jessica before. Okay, sir, retrieving. Hearing Vera's reply, he nodded with satisfaction. He didn't believe it, could Kilgrave still run abroad? Then, continue to order the driver to drive west of Hell's Kitchen. Well, in order to get the traces of the keel as quickly as possible, Lynn directly spent 5 million wealth points to solidify a treasure perception ability for himself. The role of ability is very simple, it is to perceive the direction, location, and valuable treasure. The higher the value and the closer the distance, the more intense the perceived energy fluctuations will be. And since Lynn stepped into Hell's Kitchen, he has vaguely discovered that there is a treasure in the west of Hell's Kitchen. Most likely the keel. Therefore, Lynn directly ordered the driver to drive westward, ready to observe one by one, where it was. But, just in case, Lynn said softly. My best wishes. Today, the probability of me finding the keel is greatly increased. A strange wave of perception enveloped him, and Lin's mouth twitched slightly as he continued to look out the window. 3 hours later, 475 Khaki Street in Hell's Kitchen. Looking ahead, a somewhat dilapidated building, Lin's eyes flashed. Tell the driver in front of you immediately. Stop, I'll take a look. The driver heard the instructions of the boss behind him, and immediately stepped on the brakes and stopped beside the road. Several black cars behind them saw this and parked on the side street. After Lin got out of the car, he looked at the sparse crowd around him, and at the somewhat dilapidated building not far away. He felt a lot of energy fluctuations coming from the front, and a faint smile appeared on his face. Take a closer look, the logo above reads, Boric Building. Lin stared at the dilapidated Boric building in front of him, and felt the strong fluctuation of treasures underground. His expression moved slightly, as if he had received some information, and he stood there and stopped. There were thousands of thoughts in his brain. After a long time, he turned his eyes and returned to the car, and asked the driver to drive to the Four Seasons hotel that he had booked. In the car, Lin whispered to Vera. Vera, check the property rights of the Boric building. Is there any dispute? If there is no problem, just buy it directly, and buy it at any cost. Meanwhile, have Frank come to New York with half of the SOF team and have something for them to do. Only a soft voice was heard. Okay, sir, the information is being inquired. Before long, Vera's voice began to sound again. Sir, according to the current information, there is no dispute over the property rights of Fluke Building. Negotiations with the company acquisition team are being arranged. At the same time, Frank's special operations team has received orders and booked a ticket for this afternoon, and is expected to arrive in New York tomorrow morning. Hearing Vera's reply, Lin nodded slightly in satisfaction. This time, he decided to get the keel at any cost. Because, when he was in the Boric building just now, he heard the system beep. Ding, host, find 100 copies of inferior source power, consume 10 copies, and can be used to upgrade the 4th level speech and magic follow system. Inferior power of origin is also power of origin. Although it takes multiple copies to combine, it is enough to upgrade the system to level 4. So, this time, no matter what the hand, or Jin Bing, even Shield, Hydra, can't stop Lin's intentions. This time, he asked Frank to come with half of Blackstone Security's special operations team. There are nearly 10 teams, each team has 10 people, a total of about 100 people. Every member of the team is blessed by speaking, and their physical fitness is generally more than twice that of the peak of human beings. Some members who usually perform better, even 3 times. In terms of combat experience, Frank has undergone special training. Basically, everyone can beat at least 10 Hydra agents. And every special team leader is endowed with extraordinary ability by Lin, flame, ice, gust of wind, concealment, and even mind control. And the leading Frank, the flame ability he masters, has been greatly strengthened. With his ability, he even used the fire ability to play new tricks, which matched his original fighting style very well. In terms of combat power, Lin believes that if he faces the current Iron Man, he can directly suppress it. This time, calling most of the company's combat power, and even preparing to take action in person this time, fully demonstrated Lin's determination. The way to upgrade the system, whoever blocks it, kills whoever. Night, New York, Four Seasons Hotel. Lin, who had just learned and communicated with Aoni-san, was stunned for a moment, with a look of joy on her face, and Vera's voice came from her ear. Sir, the traces of Kilgrave the Purple Man have been mastered. Currently being tracked. Whether to issue a task for Frank and other security personnel to capture. Then Lin glanced at the figure in the bathroom and whispered to Vera. Don't use it for the time being, continue to keep track. Tell Frank, tomorrow morning, I'll do it myself, and they'll just send a team to follow. Also, inform Jessica that we will meet tomorrow morning. Okay, sir, tell Frank and others your order. Vera's reply caused a smile on Lin's mouth. Immediately, listening to the sound of running water in the bathroom, a meaningful smile appeared on his face. Well, tonight, I have to study and communicate vigorously. The next day, in the morning, Lin was sitting in the car heading for Manhattan's Hell's Kitchen, looking at the message Jessica had just replied on her phone. The corners of his mouth twitched slightly, then he closed his eyes slightly and rested for a while. Well, I had too much fun last night. No, it should be because the intensity of learning and communication was too high. As a result, on the second day, my spirit was a little bit down, so I squinted for a while, and it was fine. The driver saw that Lin was resting with squinted eyes, and consciously reduced the speed a little, trying his best to keep the vehicle steady. Tisk tisk. It seems that this driver is also very self-motivated, and he will definitely achieve something in the future. A thought appeared in Lin's mind, and he stopped thinking about it immediately, recovered his spirits, adjusted his state, and prepared for today's battle. As time slowly passed, the vehicle got closer and closer to Jessica's residence. Soon, the car stopped, and the driver was heard whispering in front of him. "Mr. Lin, your destination has arrived." Lin opened her eyes and saw the familiar scene in front of her, her eyes twinkling. This time, the chance to conquer Jessica came. Well, it's not that Jessica's body is greedy, it's purely that Jessica's ability is worth cultivating. At this moment, Jessica was staying at the main entrance downstairs, walking back and forth anxiously. Her steps were a little chaotic, as if she was in a hurry to do something. Seeing this, Lin got out of the car and waved slightly to Jessica. Jessica saw it and ran over immediately. Without waiting for Lin to say a word, Jessica asked impatiently, with a very urgent tone. "Mr. Duncan, where is Kilgrave the Purple Man now?" When Lin saw the word, purple, read out of Jessica's mouth, the clenched fist in her hand and the anger in her eyes showed unabashedly outwards. Satisfied, slightly decapitated, and then said softly. "Miss Jessica, don't worry, let's get in the car and talk." Then, he opened the door and gestured. Seeing this, Jessica looked slightly hesitant, but after a while, she gritted her teeth and directly got into the car and sat next to Lin. After Lin closed the door, she gave an address and asked the driver to drive there. Then, he took out his smartphone and handed it to Jessica. Jessica's pupils shrank when she saw the screen on her phone. This is. In Jessica's eyes. A man in a purple suit appeared on the phone screen, sitting at the dining table. On the opposite side sat a beautiful woman with a delicate face, and next to it stood a waiter with a plate. It's amazing, except the man in the purple suit is smiling affectionately and constantly, enjoying. Others looked very stiff, like robots. And this man is exactly what he has been desperately looking for. Purple Man, Kilgrave. Just looking at this picture, you can know that this is a restaurant. Such a scene seems to remind her of something. Lin could clearly see that Jessica's hands holding the phone were tightly clenched, and her whole body trembled slightly, her eyes were full of strong killing intent and anger. Even Lin had heard it, holding the phone's screen, had begun to crunch. Boom. The phone was shattered by Jessica's strong hand, and the disappearance of the screen made Jessica calm down a little. Looking at the broken mobile phone, as if recalling something, he immediately turned his head and said apologetically to Lin sitting next to him. "Sorry, Mr. Duncan, my emotions are out of control. I'll pay you the money for this phone later." Immediately afterwards, his tone changed, revealing a sense of urgency. "Mr. Duncan, are we going to the Kilgrave location?" Hearing Jessica's urgent tone, Lin's mouth curled slightly and said slowly. "Yes, Jessica, this time the driver is heading to a restaurant in Queens, the same location we just saw." Then, Lin said softly. "Also, calling me Mr. Duncan is too raw. Just call me Lin. As for the money for the phone, don't worry, for me, this phone is worthless." Hearing this, Jessica's expression was obviously hesitant, but she still said hesitantly. "Okay. Mr. Lin, I owe you a favor this time. It's my duty to do anything in the future." Lin nodded slightly when she heard what Jessica said. Although the other party has the intention of declining, it is not surprising to him. Superhero is very individual, so he can't be in a hurry to subdue Jessica, and he can't expect to show her a video, and the other party will work for him. Later, he still has the means to tune in. Jessica fits his aesthetic quite well, and at the same time, the ability is not bad, and the training value is definitely strong. After that, he stopped talking and asked the driver to speed up a little, and then he started to squint for a while. Jessica next to her saw that although the flame of anger in her heart kept jumping, she sat in the car and felt the peaceful fragrance in the car, and her anger was temporarily suppressed. Or rather, the anger is just accumulated, waiting for the moment of eruption. Time passed slowly, and soon Jessica saw a restaurant not far away. Seeing the driver stop slowly, he clenched the door handle, as if he rushed out after the car stopped. As Jessica was about to open the door, she suddenly felt a tap on her shoulder, turned her head, and looked at Lynn with a questioning expression. I only heard Lynn say something meaningful. After going down, remember to control your will, the will can override the body. After speaking, the door opens automatically. Seeing this, Jessica didn't have time to carefully review what Lynn said, her face full of anger, and she rushed directly to the restaurant. Lynn shook her head slightly when she saw Jessica rushing directly to the restaurant. The current Jessica is completely dazzled by anger. It seems that she needs to be carefully adjusted later. Otherwise, you will only cause yourself trouble and will not help you in any way. While thinking about it, Lynn got out of the car slowly and walked towards the restaurant. At the same time, he stretched out his hand to signal that the security guards behind do not have to follow. This time, Jessica must be made to feel rescued after experiencing deep despair. Tisk tisk. He didn't believe that little Jessica could escape his clutches. I saw Jessica striding towards the restaurant. Pull the door handle directly, and after entering, close it hard. Boom. The loud closing sound suddenly resounded throughout the restaurant. But in the entire restaurant, except for the purple man who looked up, the others were motionless, and the whole scene seemed a little weird to others. When Jessica saw that day and thought about it, she could not wait to grind it into ashes. The fire of anger directly burned the brain, clenched his fists, strode, and waved towards the purple man Kilgrave's head, as if he wanted to smash his head directly. But, stop. The purple man Kilgrave looked surprised when he saw Jessica running towards him. Turning to see Jessica clenching her fists, she shouted angrily. The moment the words fell, it was obvious that Jessica's movements began to slow down, just as her fist was less than a meter away from the man Kilgrave. Stop suddenly. Jessica's entire body remained motionless, except for her eyes full of anger and her eyes swaying slightly. It's as if he's been cast a body fix. Then, as if Kilgrave the purple man had expected it, Sheeran stood up and walked to Jessica. Looking at Jessica's delicate face, there was nostalgia in her eyes. Then, looking at Jessica's angry eyes, she said slowly. Oh, my little Jessica, you've finally come to me. You really make me think day and night, and now, you're finally home. With that said, the man began to hold Jessica's fist with both hands, trying to press down slowly. But, Kilgrave found that no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't press Jessica's arm. So he retracted his hand and said coldly, lay down. At the same time, Jessica slowly lowered her raised arms and slowly extended her fists. Kilgrave saw this scene with a satisfied smile on his face. Then, in Jessica's angry eyes, reaching out, trying to pinch Jessica's delicate face. Right at the moment, outside, Lynn, who saw the entire restaurant passing by, suddenly shouted loudly. Stop. Lynn stood outside the restaurant, watching Kilgrave exercise his ability control, a hint of inquiry in his eyes. Ziegelref's ability can be said to be the follow-up of the inferior board. It can only control people's actions. Others, such as affecting people's emotions, and even affecting probability, cannot control extraordinary powers. But just like that, this ability is considered extremely strong in the eyes of others. Well, in the future, you can try to give this ability to others and see if you can piece together a spelling version of the performance method. Immediately, he saw Kilgrave reaching out and trying to touch Jessica's delicate face. Lynn's face became dissatisfied, and she couldn't stand it. In his opinion, Jessica is already his own. Kegelref's behavior has touched Lynn's bottom line. Immediately, he directly used the words to follow the law and shouted loudly. Stop. Kilgrave was enveloped by a strange wave. Kilgrave's hands subconsciously left and dropped. Then he looked up, looked at the main entrance of the restaurant, and looked at Lynn in a blue suit not far away, with anger in his eyes. It's as if it doesn't even realize that the current behavior is being manipulated. At the moment, Lynn, seeing Gilf with his hands off Jessica, twitched the corners of his mouth slightly, and opened the door. Walked towards Kilgrave and said softly before leaving. All abilities of this person are invalid. Well, he has a very good understanding of the effect of uttering the law, even if the other party is an inferior version of the idiom. If he is not careful and has an accident, it would be a shame to throw it home. Then, while walking, he looked at Kilgrave with a smile and kept shouting. Stop. Stop. Don't move. Kilgrave kept shouting, constantly casting his ability. Attempt to manipulate Lin and stop his own jumper, Joker. As a result, I didn't expect that no matter how I used ability, it seemed to be ineffective, and the other party had no influence. Seeing this, Kilgrave revealed disbelief and panic in his eyes. Then, as if thinking of something, he turned his head and gave a loud command to everyone behind him, his tone revealing anxiety. Come forward and surround him. Then he pointed at Jessica, pointed at Lin, and said urgently. Jessica, come forward, attack him, kill him. Result. Everyone was motionless under Kilgrave's disbelieving gaze. Then, Kilgrave looked at Lin who was approaching, gritted his teeth, and rushed forward. With a knife in hand, he tried to stab Lin in the stomach. When Lin saw this, the corners of her mouth twitched slightly. Said softly. Stop. Suddenly, I saw Kilgrave who had just raised his knife and took a step. Instant stop. Then, under Lin's playful gaze, he stepped forward and slapped Kilgrave hard on both sides of the face. Snapped. 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 The loud voice suddenly rang in the ears of everyone in the restaurant. Lin could see it with the naked eye, and there was a hint of joy, even pleasure, in everyone's eyes. Jessica does the same. Lin then removed the knife from Kilgrave's hand. Then he said coldly in a commanding tone. Kneel down. Immediately. Boom. Kilgrave instantly fell to his knees, and there was a crisp sound between his knees and the floor. He turned his head in the direction of Jessica, as if bowing his head to admit his mistake, but there was fear and anger in his eyes. Seeing this scene, Jessica's eyes revealed strong joy and joy. Lin saw the pleasure in Jessica's eyes and whispered to Jessica. Remove control. Almost instantly, Jessica found herself able to move freely. Glancing at Lin, then at Kilgrave kneeling down to him. Anger rose, strode forward, and kicked Kilgrave, who was kneeling on the ground, violently. Boom. In an instant, Kilgrave was kicked against the wall by Jessica, and the table and chairs in the middle were all broken. It can be seen to the naked eye that the current Kilgore has blood all over his face, and his hands are cut open by some wooden thorns, which are full of wounds. Jessica looked at the miserable Kilgrave with a hint of pleasure in her eyes. Immediately afterwards, he walked directly to the wall and started beating Kilgrave with punch after punch. As if to vent the anger in his heart. With punch after punch, kick after kick, Zirin constantly vomited blood and kept howling. It can be said that the bruises on the nose and the face are all mild, but now his face is covered in blood, his eyes are full of bloodshots, and his arms, including his thighs, are beginning to twist strangely. Lin looked at Kilgrave, who was almost losing his breath, his eyes were full of smiles, and then he whispered something. Die. Almost instantly, Kilgrave could be seen losing his life as Jessica punched punch after punch. Well, Lin was just speeding up the process, couldn't bear to see Kilgrave tortured, and had no other intentions at all. Jessica continued to beat Kilgrave's body as if unaware of his death. Seeing this, Lin strode forward, patted Jessica, and said comfortingly. Jessica, stop fighting. He is dead. The moment the words fell, Jessica froze and glanced at Kilgrave, who had been beaten into a human shape by herself. There was a hint of joy in his expression. Lin saw Jessica's happy face and continued. Don't worry, I'll take care of the aftermath. Now, come with me. With that said, Lin pulled up Jessica's blood-stained fist and walked towards the main entrance of the restaurant. As he walked, he kept giving orders. Smashed to nothing. Disappear without a trace. Restore. Remove control. Fuzzy memory. Then, under Jessica's surprised gaze, the corpse of the purple man Kilgrave instantly turned into blood foam, and then disappeared like an eraser. And all the broken and damaged things in the entire restaurant, as if going back in time, returned to their original positions, without any damage, and very clean. The other people in the restaurant began to move slowly, and their expressions revealed confusion. The whole process is quite like Harry Potter's magic. It seems wonderful, magical, and even a little mythical. In such a magical scene, Jessica followed Lynn to the outside of the restaurant. Walking outside the restaurant, Jessica looked back at the restaurant and saw that everyone started to move. As if nothing happened just now, eat when it's time to eat, and eat when it's time to eat. Then, Jessica said to Lynn in a very surprised tone. This is. Before Jessica could finish speaking, Lynn said directly with a smile. This is my ability, I call it God's word. What I say will become reality. What I think will definitely produce results. What I think is false is true. Well, I can't mention this. If some people have nothing to study the relevant information and find trouble for themselves, it will be troublesome. As for divine word, upon hearing this name, it was like communicating with the gods. Tisk tisk, if other people try their best to cut off the connection between people and gods. Lynn must tell him what it means to be honest. As for the problem with the ability leak, Lynn doesn't care. In this Marvel world where future crises are flying all over the world, the exposure of ability is not a bad thing. On the contrary, an image with a ruthless heart and strong ability will make people angry and jealous. He won't come to tease his beard from time to time. Thinking of this, Lynn looked at Jessica's hesitant expression, smiled slightly, pulled Jessica directly, and walked into her car. Jessica had no resistance. After entering the car, Jessica seemed to feel the familiar aroma. Emotions slowly calmed down. Lynn twitched the corners of her mouth when she saw this, and said softly to Jessica with a smile. Jessica, regarding Kilgrave's matter, my side will completely deal with the aftermath, and I won't worry about trouble finding you here. Also, did you take what I said to you just now to heart? Speaking of this, Lynn's tone was slightly serious. When Jessica heard it, her brain quickly recalled what Lynn had said to him before she got out of the car. After going down, remember to control your will, the will can override the body. Recalling what Lynn said, Jessica smiled awkwardly, as if a little girl had forgotten something important. Seeing the faint embarrassment on Jessica's face, she said calmly. Jessica, I have been catching the traces of the Purple Man before, so I have seen your information. According to the information I have collected, you have the ability to break through Kilgrave's control before. As long as your will is strong enough, it is enough to break through the control. Why is that? I told you that. Pity. Having said that, Lynn shook his head slightly. Hearing this, Jessica looked at Lynn, who shook her head slightly, and felt ashamed, and said hesitantly. Excuse me. Lynn. I let you down. Lynn sees Jessica's face full of shame, and her heart immediately rises with joy. Well, it's good to know the guilt, and you will not be able to escape from your own hands if you need to guide step by step. Then, he said in a slightly serious tone. According to the information I have received, it's not just my family who have their eyes on Kilgrave. Another evil force is also eyeing it. Even, the reason why I found Kilgrave's trail was because I was tracking the evil forces there. So, it is very likely that you are also being targeted. As far as I know, the forces of that side will basically arrest and even brainwash people with extraordinary abilities to serve them, but those who cannot be used by them will basically kill those who can. I exposed ability before and got bombed, that's what they did. Well, yes, that is the truth. Shield, also a branch of the snake shield, is a Hydra. They are evil and very good at brainwashing. After Jessica heard Lynn's words, her face slowly turned serious, even panic. Then I should. Before Jessica could finish speaking, Lynn said directly with a bit of seriousness. I went to you this time. On the one hand, I really wanted to get the trace of Kilgrave. On the other hand, I didn't want you to fall into their hands. I observed your fighting style just now. It can be said that you have no combat experience, and even an experienced agent can defeat you. Well, Natasha Romanoff will do, that's fine. So, if you want to have the self-protection ability, you even want to be more powerful. I can help you. Having said that, Lynn muttered something quickly in a very small voice. I think Jessica agrees with my words very much and chooses to join me. The moment the words fell, a strange wave shrouded Jessica. Jessica was struggling to hear what Lynn said earlier. Seeing this, Lynn slowly held Jessica's with both hands, her eyes full of sincerity. Well, absolutely sincere, nothing to do with lust. Soon, Jessica, who was violently fluctuating in her heart, began to struggle, and slowly calmed down, as if she had made up her mind. She took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, "I promise you." Lynn had a faint smile on her face when she heard Jessica's response. Then, ordered the driver to drive to the Four Seasons hotel that he had ordered. Facing it, Jessica said softly with a smile, "Let's go back to the hotel first. You killed Kilgrave just now. You are covered in blood, and you are a little embarrassed. Go back to wash up. I am arranging training for you." Hearing what Lynn said, Jessica seemed to understand the implications. Then looking at Lynn's handsome face, he nodded shyly. Well, Jessica Jones takes it. The next morning, New York, Four Seasons Hotel. Lynn looked at Jessica, who was still asleep next to her, with a smile on her face. Sure enough, a woman with extraordinary ability, especially the extraordinary ability of the body. Physical fitness is very good. The madness last night made him feel a little overwhelmed by his blessed physical fitness. But, after a lot of rain yesterday, Jessica's trust in herself has increased significantly. Last night, Jessica's future development direction has been arranged. He decided to let Frank take him to practice combat experience first. Then, give Jessica a new transcendent ability, strengthen her combat power, and let her be responsible for some things on this side of New York. Well, Lynn didn't think about it. Let Jessica be his personal secretary, and then learn to communicate every day. But, doesn't that amount to tying him up? His goals are the towering forest and the sea of stars, and the two of them can maintain the current relationship. Meanwhile, Tony at the Stark Villa was listening to Jarvis's report with a dark face. Sir, the current clues about your uncle Obadiah have been deployed with defensive measures, and it is impossible to obtain his previous traces through data intrusion. Someone needs to physically obtain the data on his computer in person. Tony listened to Jarvis's reply, his face sullen, as if he didn't know what he was thinking. After a short while, Tony heard the sound of high heels stepping on the floor next to him, a faint smile on his face. Almost every few days he hears a similar sound. Here's Pepper reporting his schedule to him as his secretary. Well, although his schedule is the exact opposite of Pepper's reporting schedule. But he liked Pepper's helpless look. Soon he saw Pepper approaching him with a document. Prepared to report to him about the relevant itinerary as usual. However, Pepper hadn't spoken yet. Tony opened his mouth first and said to Pepper in a very serious tone. Pepper, there is one thing I need your help with. Pepper heard Tony's tone of seriousness, and his face rose a little curiously. You know, recently, because Tony said that he was going to shut down the military department of Stark Industries, a lot of things happened, and she also told Tony many times. But Tony's tone has been very cynical, either perfunctory or perfunctory. Suddenly, his tone was so serious, it was really curious. Speak, Pepper said curiously. Pepper, there is one thing I need your help with. This matter concerns Star Industries and my destiny. I don't trust anyone in the company, I only trust you. Tony said in a very serious tone, and at the same time took out a black USB stick from the table next to it, handed it to Pepper, looked at Pepper with pleading eyes, and continued. This black U-disc, please put it on my Uncle Obadiah's computer. It only takes a minute, and that's it. Pepper heard Tony's request, and there was a glint of disbelief in his eyes. Not to mention that Obadiah is Tony's uncle. It is said that such behavior clearly violates the company's articles of association, and even violates the law. Once found, it can definitely be dealt with as a crime of commercial espionage and directly put in prison. She came to Stark Industries to make money, not to go to jail. However, seeing Tony's pleading eyes, his heart suddenly moved, he was a little overwhelmed, and said hesitantly. This. Tony looked at Pepper, who was at a loss, and couldn't bear it. However, in the entire company, except for Pepper, who can access his uncle's computer, the rest are his uncle's people. If I look for them, I am afraid that they will sell him instead. At that time, it will really force Obadiah to ruthlessly. So, Tony spoke to Pepper again in a pleading tone. Pepper, help me. Pepper looked at the black USB flash drive in his hand, and at the familiar face in front of him, thinking of the past. He closed his eyes, gritted his teeth, and said in a deep voice. Okay, let's see how to do it. Saying that, he took the U-disc and walked back. This matter is a bit big, she needs to calm down. Even if she wants to do it, she has to find a way to do it well. Tony looked at Pepper leaving with a USB flash drive, and smiled bitterly. To be honest, he didn't want Pepper to take such a risk either. When something went wrong, he was caught, he wanted to fish it out, but he could still fish it out. What he was afraid of was that his uncle would be ruthless and would not even give him a chance. The next morning, Obadiah's life secretary, Hydra agent Emily, looking at Pepper holding a black U-disc in his hand and hurriedly leaving Obadiah's office, a smile appeared on his face. He reached out and touched the earphone next to his ear, and said in a deep voice, "The looting plan begins." All I heard was a serious voice coming from the earphones. "Agent 56, you did a great job. I'm in charge of Tony Stark's side. You are in charge of Obadiah's side. Receive. Hydra hail. Hydra hail." The next morning, Stark Industries, Obadiah office. Emily, who was wearing a secretary outfit, with a shallow smile, looked at Obadiah sitting in a chair, holding a picture, and said it casually, with a slightly oppressive tone. "Mr. Obadiah, take a look. We've helped you solve a big problem. After our investigation, Ms. Pepper is afraid to infiltrate your office and steal a lot of confidential information through your computer, including your previous video of Tony kidnapping on your computer. Now, I'm afraid Tony knows the truth. However, after all, we cooperate with each other, and we cannot bear to witness such a thing. So, we've helped you capture Ms. Pepper. And, have called Tony to threaten Tony not to reveal your information. Otherwise, we will tear up the votes. Believe that, with Ms. Pepper willing to take the risk of finding a crime, still sneaking into your office, Tony won't leave it alone. For now, we're doing everything we can. The rest is up to you." Hearing Hydra Emily's words, Obadiah's face darkened. Does he still know what the other party means inside and outside the words? Forcing him to hurry up on Tony. Because, generally speaking, which boss will pay more attention to the safety of his female secretary than to the safety of his own life? To put it poorly, the secretary will die if he dies, and the boss will be fine. So, from HYDRA's Emily and Obadiah's point of view, the kidnapping of Pepper made Tony's actions a little hesitant at best. The longer the time, the less hesitant. The more it drags on, it is very likely that Tony ignores Pepper's safety and directly uses the evidence to find the military, or even other organizations, convict Obadiah, and completely master the Stark industry. At that time, Hydra patted his butt and left, and he, Obadiah, had to go to jail. Well, the United States does not have the death penalty, with a maximum sentence of 526 years. So, Hydra really forced Obadiah to do something to Tony. But now Tony has a precautionary mentality, it is impossible to do it directly, and he will definitely use the power of Hydra. Once you tap into the power of Hydra, it's hard to break free. If nothing else, the evidence alone is enough to send Obadiah to prison. What's more, Hydra has a series of behaviors that are enough to restrain capitalists like Obadiah. Tisk tisk. This Hydra is like sticky candy, once it sticks, it's hard to get rid of. Meanwhile, Lynn has walked to the Stark villa. Lynn had just entered the living room of the villa when he saw Tony Stark pacing back and forth anxiously. Lynn was a little curious about this, what made Tony so anxious. He didn't say it directly on the phone, and he had to call him to the villa. He was about to open his mouth to ask. Tony Stark saw his figure, then ran over immediately, talking like a cannonball, one after another, very anxiously said. "Lynn, it's all right, something has happened. Pepper got caught by Obadiah's men. This morning, the other party suddenly called and sent a video. The above is the process of Pepper's kidnapping. The other party asked me to take out the core technology of steel armor energy. Otherwise, we will tear up the vote and kill Pepper directly. I've already mailed an energy core to stabilize them. However, they are asking for technical information tomorrow. I remember that your Blackstone security is not weak, and Pepper is also wearing your Star Watch. I think about it, but I still think your strength is more reliable. Trouble you guys from Blackstone, help me save Pepper." After listening to Tony's anxious words, Lynn's eyes flashed and he fell into thought. This kind of thing has never happened in the original plot, it seems that Hydra did it. It didn't take long for him to think about it. Seeing the anxious look on Tony's face, Chen Sheng said. Okay, No problem, I will dispatch the company's top combat power to help you rescue Pepper. Also, this time I don't feel like it's just your Uncle Obadiah. The mysterious power I mentioned before is definitely involved. Don't worry, I'll make arrangements now. Saying that, under Tony's gaze, call me Frank, you came to Stark Villa with 2 special forces. There is something to do. Okay, boss, I'll be there in half an hour. After hanging up, Lynn comforted Tony. Tony, don't worry, the other party will definitely not attack Pepper until he has obtained the complete information. Tomorrow morning, I will also go to the negotiation scene with you to save Pepper. Hearing Lynn's comforting words, Tony hesitated. Lynn, you better not go, tomorrow may be dangerous. Tomorrow, I will wear Mark 1, and I will not be weak, as the main force of salvation. But, you're different. You don't have sufficient defenses. You'd better let your Blackstone security people help me save Pepper. I am delaying their main combat power here. Hearing this, Lynn smiled slightly and said 2 words to Tony unhurriedly. Still, almost instantly, Tony felt himself stiff, as if he was covered in a layer of stone, unable to move. Then, Lynn said lightly under Tony's horrified eyes. Remove control. The instant the voice fell, Tony felt like he could move. Immediately opened his mouth, speaking in a very surprised tone. Before Tony could finish speaking, Lynn spoke directly. This is my ability. God's word. The next morning, in an abandoned building in Queens, New York. More than 20 Hydra agents are located in various key positions of the building. On the top floor, a large armor is placed there, which is the Iron Overlord armor. In the middle of the Iron Overlord, a dazzling white light shines, representing its sufficient energy. Inside, it was Obadiah himself. At the moment, Obadiah has a serious face. Yesterday he had decided to allow that mysterious force to jointly kill Tony and take control of Stark Industries. He was in charge of killing Tony, and the mysterious forces were in charge of negotiating with the military. Guarantee his smooth succession to the position of chairman of Stark Industries. As a price, some of the weapons produced by Stark Industries will not only provide a lot of money every year, but will also deliver Stark Industries weapons to them at a cost, and also accept some members to study some weapons. In short, except for the price paid, which is a bit painful for Obadiah, everything else is fine. As long as the other party does what he says, he can take over Stark Industries smoothly. Once the other party broke his promise, he glanced at the Iron Overlord he had equipped with a faint smile on his face. Don't blame him for being cruel. Without them, things can still be done, but the difficulty will be higher and the cost will be higher. Originally, the energy problem that made him very worried has now been solved. Now, with the steel armor technology, as long as Tony is dead, he has the confidence to negotiate with the military and compromise. Then, Obadiah, who couldn't wait, asked Emily next to him. What time is it? Tony, how long until they come? Emily looked at Pepper who was tied next to her, and replied lightly with a smile. Don't worry, it's still half an hour before 9 o'clock. Don't worry, Pepper's still here, Tony can't run. Pepper, who was next to him, listened to the words exchanged with Emily and Obadiah of Iron Overlord, and prepared to curse. Pity. His mouth was tied and he could only make a humming cry. At this moment, Lynn, sitting in the car, looked at Tony who was a little restless next to him, and said comfortingly. Tony, don't be nervous. This time we are very well prepared. Your Mark 1 is in the trunk, and you can get off at your destination when you arrive. You can equip it at any time. I'll follow you to negotiate deals and delay them. Those combatants will take the opportunity to kill each other and save Pepper. Tony was silent when he heard Lynn's soothing tone. If you can't save Pepper this time, then. Immediately, he shook his head slightly, stopped thinking about it, closed his eyes slightly, and prepared for the next negotiation and battle. Lynn saw this, and a smile formed on the corner of her mouth. This time, it is estimated that he can get Tony's favor. More importantly, he didn't believe that Hydra could hide this time. Just let him catch a man, and he'll be sure to let him testify about Hydra's trail. At that time, he and Tony teamed up to lead S.H.I.E.L.D. Tisk tisk. Baron Strucker's Hydra, he can't believe he hasn't been beaten. I still want to find aliens, and I want to master the transcendent ability, so I don't even have a place for them to be safe. Well, better, just kill Baron Strucker. This is also considered revenge for the previous attack. The vengeful Lin thought so. As time slowly passed, and soon, the vehicle began to stop. Tony and Lin stared at the abandoned building outside. There is seriousness in one's eyes, and exploration in the other's eyes. Immediately, the two got out of the car together. Tony walked to the trunk, and Lin began to stare in the direction of the top floor, as if he could see the Iron King on the top floor. Soon, Tony walked up to Lin wearing his Mark 1. Signed to Lin to walk into the building together. Seeing this, Lin sent a message through her cell phone, representing the official start of the rescue operation. Immediately, with a serious look on his face, he followed Tony into the building and up the top floor. Around not far away, 20 people in black battle suits ran towards the abandoned building. Strangely, there was no sound in the process of running. Moreover, visible to the naked eye, everyone's figures are constantly changing, as if they are always integrated into the surrounding environment. One is not careful and it is easy to ignore the past. This is an extraordinary ability for combat squad leaders. Mimic. It can control a part of the surrounding area and completely integrate with the surrounding area. There is no sound, no smell, and even as long as they are not face to face, it is difficult to find their traces. Soon, they came to the abandoned building. Frank, the leader, made a gesture, and instantly everyone began to hide their bodies and slowly sneaked into various positions in the building. And Frank himself, following him, rushed towards the top floor. What he's going to do? It's about protecting Lin from an unexpected attack and saving Pepper. Well, while the odds are slim, Frank thinks such behavior is necessary. Lin also let him arrange. Lin at the moment, with a fighter and Tony in Mark 1, is standing on the top floor. I saw Tony and Obadiah looking at each other angrily and scolding each other. One questioned why the other party betrayed Star Industries, why he kidnapped him, and kidnapped Pepper. A man who keeps stressing that he has worked hard for Stark Industries for many years. Tony is going to shut down the military industry sector and self-destruct the company, and he does so to save Stark Industries. Lin glanced at each other and cursed Tony and Obadiah. Then he said with a smile to Hydra Amaya, who was standing not far away. Secretary Emily, long time no see. I didn't expect that your appearance has changed so much now that I almost didn't recognize you. Hydra Emily also responded with a smile. Boss, didn't I quit my job? I don't work for anyone else now. Look, how is my craft? Saying that, he pointed to Pepper, who was constantly struggling and buzzing. The two looked at each other and cursed inwardly. Laughing Tiger. Femme Beauty. Thanks for watching, please subscribe and support our channel.